Hey everybody. Okay, so today I want to go over your worksheet about the surrender at the Appomattox Courthouse. This mainly goes over the picture that you see right here. This is the surrendering, the South surrendering. So y'all didn't get the passage in your packet, so I wanted to read it offline so that you could get a little bit better idea and refreshing of the Appomattox Courthouse. So the Appomattox Courthouse was the end of the Civil War. So let's just read a little bit about it, and or actually I might just let this read it to you so it's a little more clear.
The Civil War was an especially difficult war because it was a war where neighbors were fighting neighbors, and sometimes families were even fighting one another. Close your eyes for a moment and think about your family. Imagine you are at a family picnic with your parents, siblings, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins. Everyone is having a good time playing games and eating hot dogs. Now, keep your eyes closed and imagine your family back in time during the Civil War. Imagine half of your family is wearing the blue Union uniform of the North, and the other half of the family is wearing the gray uniform of the Confederate South. Your family is no longer playing games and eating hot dogs, but is instead on two different sides of a very serious war. This is exactly what happened during the Civil War. And this neighbor against neighbor and family against family continued to complicate the situation through the end of the war. This sets the scene for what happened during the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, which is sometimes called the Gentleman's Agreement. History remembers several great Civil War leaders, but the two most prominent are Ulysses S. Grant and Robert E. Lee. Ulysses S. Grant led the Union Army north during the American Civil War. Grant was known as a strong and resilient general who led the North to win the Civil War. Grant went on to become the 18th President of the United States. Robert E. Lee led the Confederate forces during the American Civil War. He used his knowledge of engineering to build field fortifications, which were used for the first time during the Civil War, and were beneficial to the South. These field fortifications later became known as trench warfare, and were used in other wars. Days before the final battle at Appomattox, Lee was leading his troops south in an attempt to get supplies and meet with troops in North Carolina to strengthen his army. Grant was leading his forces to cut off supplies to the Confederate forces and prevent Lee's army from moving south. During these final battles, the Union forces were able to capture railroads and cut off supplies. This forced Lee to the Appomattox Railroad Station in a final attempt to get supplies to feed his troops. But Grant was able to cut him off from even those supplies. At the same time, Grant was sending messages to Lee, asking for his surrender. Once Lee realized his supplies were cut off, he accepted Grant's invitation to discuss the terms of surrender. Early on April 9, 1865, the two leaders agreed to meet at the Wilmer McLean home at Appomattox Courthouse to end the war. Grant realized that the terms of surrender would set the scene going forward to heal a nation divided by war. It was customary for the losing army to give up all their weapons. However, Grant allowed General Lee to keep his sword as a symbol of respect. Grant also led the terms of surrender, which included allowing the Confederate troops parole. These troops allowed the Confederate soldiers to have food and keep their horses, allowing them to return home. The signing of the surrender documents was done respectfully. This all resulted in what is sometimes called the Gentleman's Agreement, ending the Civil War.
Okay, so now that we have listened to the passage, I want us to go over. I kind of thought it was a fun worksheet to look at. It was the Appomattox Courthouse worksheet. So let's look at what it asks us to do. It says, after reading the Appomattox Courthouse article, please analyze the painting made by Thomas Nast in the 1890s. Take a few minutes to really look at the painting and answer the questions below. Be sure to use complete sentences as you answer each question. On yours, you need to use complete sentences, but I'm going to write down the main highlights for each one. So on my computer, I'm going to try to blow the picture up really well where you can see it. This was a little bit hard to see in the video, so I've got it on here for us. So the first question says to name the two main leaders in this painting. So as we read, we knew that the main leaders were Robert E. Lee and Ulysses S. Grant. So we know that Grant was the leader of the North, which was also the Union. So on here, I'm going to write for you the North, which was also the Union. And then we said that Lee, Robert E. Lee, was the leader of the South, which was also known as the Confederates. So we see here Robert E. Lee and Grant making a deal. I would think that it's the two main guys right there shaking hands. So let's move on to the second one. It says, who else is in the painting? Well, I just feel like those are the soldiers that were with Robert E. Lee at the time of the surrendering. So I would write other soldiers surrendering. Okay. So number 3 says, what is the significance of the fact that General Lee is wearing his sword? So in our passage, it said, I'll zoom out and I will get the correct info. It did say right here, however, Grant allowed General Lee to keep his sword as a symbol of respect. So I would say that, the reason that they both have swords on is to show that they're leaders. And Grant allowing Robert E. Lee to keep his sword, it just showed respect for him, that he knew that they did the best that they could and that they're agreeing, and he knew respectfully him keeping his weapons was one of the right things to do. So you could write on number 3 that the sword either you could say equaled respect. Okay, number 4. Describe the scene or the setting. So when I look at this, I look at two men making an agreement. So I would write, describe the scene. Agreements were going on. I think kindness from Mr. Grant, because he also allowed the Confederates to keep their horses, and that is something that he did not have to do. Out of the kindness of his heart, he allowed them to keep their horses and food, and gave them supplies and gave them food. So that was very kind of him. Okay, so let's look at number 5. It says, some call the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse the gentleman's agreement. Do you think this picture shows gentleman's agreement? Either way you answer, support your answer with the details and tell why you think that way. So like I said before, I feel like this picture showed two men agreeing. Even though the North won, the South felt in agreement for what the North was going to allow them to keep and what to do. They did not send them all to jail. They let them go. They took away some of their weapons, and some of the supplies were cut off. But he allowed them to have food. He allowed them to keep the horses and wagons and everything that they need to get back. So I do see agreement in this picture. So I would have to say yes, I do see agreement in this picture. So, well, that's it, guys, for today. If you have any questions about any of this, just let me know. Like I've said in the other videos, I do not mind any questions from any of you. That's what I'm here for. So I hope you're having a great day at home. Stay safe.